if you want to avoid all the sickness this winter, the snotty noses, the coughs, the colds, the sleepless nights, the fevers, the Panadol and the antibiotics, the ear infections, the grumpy, tired kids, the days off work and school and childcare, are all those memories of last winter coming back? I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to be that way this winter. I have a free online masterclass, 3 simple ways to boost your kids' immunity to avoid a winter full of sickness. It's on demand, meaning you can register and watch it straight away or watch it at a time that is convenient for you. Head on over to naturalsuperkids.com/immune and you will be able to sign up. In the masterclass, I am covering our natural, simple and effective approach to avoiding winter infections, how to boost your family's immunity with our proven 3-step naturopathic strategy that is really easy for you to implement as a busy mum. We're going to talk about the immune depleters that you need to avoid so you're not wasting time and money building up your kids' immunity that is just being depleted by these common foods and environmental factors. I am sharing heaps of practical tips. I promise it will be an hour well spent. You can register again at naturalsuperkids.com/immune. I can't wait to hear how you find it and to give you the tips to make this winter healthier. Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Natural Super Kids podcast. Today, we are talking about something very different than we normally talk about on the podcast, and I have a special guest joining me to chat all things relationships, specifically how to recreate your relationship with your partner after having kids. And I wanted to do a couple of episodes on relationships because I was reading a great book on relationships a few months ago. Actually, I was listening to an audiobook and I shared on my stories that I was listening, and it just generated a bit of conversation, and people were interested for me to cover this on the podcast. And more about that book in next week's episode. But when I really thought about it, I thought, well, you know, the quality of our relationship with our partner when we are a parent is really important to our kids' well-being, their mental health, their emotional health. And so I'm excited to be covering these topics. I'm really interested in relationships. I'm always, reading and listening to things that help me improve and optimize my relationships. So I'm excited to bring Aston Simmonds on to the podcast, who I am going to introduce you to in just a moment. This conversation with Aston was amazing. I could have spoken to her for hours longer. She has a lot to say, and you can really hear, how passionate she is. And she's got, a story of her own in terms of how she came to be doing this work. So Aston is a relationship coach, a retreat facilitator, a podcast host, a writer, and a married mum of 2. And Aston helps women and couples to communicate, connect, and recreate their relationship after having kids. She has some incredibly popular online programs and retreats that her and her husband Adam run together, and they've helped hundreds of couples from all over the world transform their most intimate relationships. So I am excited to introduce you to Aston. Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, Aston. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to chat with you today. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, me too. This is a topic a little bit different from what we normally sort of chat about here on the Natural Super Kids podcast. But as I was saying to you off air, like such an important part of our kids' overall well-being. So today we're talking about relationships essentially. Before we get into it, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be doing this work as a relationship coach?
Yeah, definitely. So I love the personal development world. That has been my world pretty much since I was 16. So I have been plugged into all the books. They were literally the only books I read were self-help books. I just loved that they gave us a bit of a manual for how to live this sometimes complicated and hard life. And I've loved that from, pretty much since I finished school. And then I always was gravitating towards work that was service based, where I could have deep conversations, where I could help people. That did actually lead me into pharmacy. So for a few years, I was in that arena. I'd always get in trouble for spending too much time with patients or clients because I really wanted to understand them on a deeper level, not just their symptoms. So I've always been someone who has that space and time for people to have those deeper conversations. I thought I was going to go into counseling and psychology, started to go down that arena, but realized it wasn't quite in alignment with my values and how I wanted to help people. I really wanted to empower people to be able to make better choices for themselves and to give them those skills and tools to know that they could do it and that they didn't need to rely on me. So I ended up going into life coaching and I was mainly working with women at first, but then I actually started to have my own personal challenges in my relationship. And I started to share vulnerably my situation and what I was going through and what I was doing to help myself through it. Really, with just the intention that if I'm going through this, I'm sure other people are. And I really believe that the way we overcome our struggles is by owning our story. And you have to be willing to be vulnerable about that. So I decided to go first and be vulnerable about it and share. And I had a lot of people coming to me basically saying, oh my gosh, I need this. It's like you're in my head. This is exactly what I'm going through. Can you share with me what you've been doing? And my clients started to actually share that they were having relationship challenges and that's what they wanted to work on. So I started to share with them what we were doing. And kind of one thing led to the next. It kind of evolved itself. And then I ended up transitioning into just focusing on relationships, which to most of my family and friends isn't surprising. I've loved relationships my whole life, really. It's been the thing that I've been the most passionate about. So it's not really that surprising that I've ended up here to most of the people that know me. But yeah, that's kind of a summary of how I ended up here.
Yeah, you shared that so well. And it's really, nice to hear a bit about how you got to doing this work. I actually worked in pharmacy as well. A lot of naturopaths start in pharmacy. And I had that same experience of like, they were there for their medication, but I wanted to talk about,
Yeah, you want to go deeper. Like, where's
yeah,
this coming from? What's the root cause? And they're like, nope, we don't have time for that.
exactly. I know. Well, that's really not what that kind of pharmacy industry is all about. So yes, I relate to you on that. So I guess like there's so much I want to cover, and I'm excited to pick your brain. For me personally, of course, like relationships are something that I'm always striving to improve. Let's start by talking about some of the, most common challenges you hear from parents when it comes to the challenges that they're having in their relationships with their partners.
Yeah. And it is honestly, this is kind of how I ended up in this place. I had my son and that stretched our relationship, but we were kind of able to cope through it or, kind of push things under the rug. But once I had my daughter, it stretched us to a level where we could not keep ignoring those cracks. I think our children are incredible teachers and incredible mirrors, and so are our partners and our relationships. And so when I had my daughter, a lot of the issues that were already there, but we had somehow been able to avoid or distract from, because let's be honest, when you become a parent, there's a lot of things going on and you can become very distracted very easily. And we did as well. We kind of fell into that trap of I was just with the kids a lot and just focusing on the kids, and my husband was focusing on work, thinking that if we got those two things right, everything else would work. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. And society really sets us up to fail in a sense like that. The system doesn't support parents a lot of the time to have a thriving relationship, especially in those early years of childhood. So I have so much compassion for everyone going through that, because that was my experience too. And that's really how I ended up here. And that comes back to what the biggest challenge is. I think more than anything, couples are constantly asking me, how do we have a thriving relationship when we are trying to balance business, work, children, family commitments, life commitments? Often they'll describe it to me like they're feeling like they're being pulled apart in all these different areas of their life. And as a result, their relationship suffers because they're trying to meet all these needs, and many of them have more than one child, and that means a whole lot of other needs that they need to meet. And it is challenging, and that I would say that's the biggest struggle that I get all of the time. How do we manage it all and not just survive through it, but how do we actually thrive? Because surviving is one thing. And yes, there is a time where sometimes we are just surviving. Some seasons, that is it. And we need to be real that that is part of the human experience. But if we're chronically surviving, that's where we need to just ask those deeper questions and really take a bit of a look within and a check-in with ourselves and our life, and have that deeper assessment of, is this actually what I want? Is this the life I want to be living? Is this a relationship I want to be in and be modeling to my children? Because I know for me and my husband, we were doing the best that we could with what we knew, and all parents are. There's absolutely no judgment or shame, because I've literally been you. And you really are doing the best that you can. But unfortunately, there's no education at school around relationships, which is crazy to me, just like mind blowing, because everything is built on relationships. It's literally the foundation of our lives, whether it's business, family, anything. And we're also then modeling often our parents' relationships, and bless them, they didn't get the education either. So we can't even blame them. But we often saw things that we're either trying to avoid, or we end up falling into their patterns because that's what we saw. And we just had to kind of ask ourselves some tough questions, like, would we want our children to be in a relationship like we are right now? And that's a hard question to answer. But if you can be honest with yourself, and we had to be 4 years ago, the answer was no. I didn't want my daughter to marry a husband like my husband at that point. My husband did not want my son to marry a wife like the wife I was being at that point. So we knew we needed new information. Nothing changes if nothing changes. So we needed new teachers. We needed new information. We need to work out what we didn't know so that we could actually create the relationship that we wanted. And that's what kind of centers on this journey. And some key things that we learn, I mean, there is so much, but some key things that we learned, we're looking at our priority system on a practical level, like for that specific question of like, how do you manage it all and how do you thrive? The first thing is to take the feedback from your life right now. If you're prioritizing work, take the feedback about what that's doing to your intimate relationship with your partner. A lot of men will say, I thought that if I worked more and we got a bigger house and we had more money, that she would be happy. And they are so confused when they realize that's not what she really wanted. On the surface, that makes perfect sense logically, but relationships are emotional based. They don't make logical sense. So we have to then ask a deeper question of what is the emotional need? And we have to do this with our children as well. Go deeper. If their behavior is one way, go deeper. What is the emotional need we're not meeting? And often it's connection. So if your husband is working all the time and thinking he's providing for the family, thinking he's there, but you're not feeling connected, then you need to look at your priorities. You take the feedback and go, well, maybe we actually need to move our priorities around so that we do feel more connected, if that actually is our priority in this season of our life. And we kind of take our clients through a process to help them do this, to pick apart and take the feedback from your priority system right now. And without judgment, I must really stress this: do not judge or shame or blame yourself. It's not helpful. It's better to come from a place of curiosity, just getting curious. Just, there is no failure. This is just feedback. That is what I say to clients all the time. It is just feedback of, okay, we're prioritizing kids or we're prioritizing work and we're getting X result. If that's not what we want, what do we need to shift in our priorities to get what we want? And it can be that simple, but you do need to really turn inwards and get clear on what your relationship vision is, not what society has sold you, which is, we kind of fall into this trap of get engaged, get married, have some kids, buy the house, have a dog, buy a new car, get a boat, maybe a caravan, go on a few holidays, and it kind of goes on and on and on and on. Get kids through school. I hear this a lot, like people believing that if I just get kids through school, I'll reconnect to my partner once my kids have grown up. And I'm just so heartbroken when I speak to those couples who have fallen into that, and they're in that era of their life where, the prime, where they're meant to be connecting, and they're disconnected from themselves and each other. And it's so sad. It's kind of like they feel like, oh, I thought we were meant to get here and it was meant to feel different. But you can't ignore your relationship for 20, 30, 40 years and then just wake up one morning and expect to pick up where you left off. And I know it makes logical sense. I know that's why people buy into it. It's too busy now. Wait until the kids are grown up. Our philosophy is find a way to stay connected now through the chaos, because that helps you parent better. You're on the same page, and it's a much better example to your kids that life isn't just about achieving external things. There's also this sense of fulfillment, and that's inwards, and that comes from your relationship. So how can you nurture them whilst achieving those external things that you want to achieve?
Yes. Wow. I love that. And it's so many years to go through, isn't it? Like disconnected to then suddenly expect to connect again. And I mean, I've got older children, teenagers, 14 and 16, and it doesn't just happen, like this stage, it's kind of like, oh, okay, the kids are kind of doing their own thing a bit now. Like, and you've got to kind of remember, well, what are we like doing together when the kids aren't around? And it's all a process. But I love that idea of, staying connected through the chaos. And
Yeah,
it's so
definitely.
important.
And there's a specific framework we teach that you can use, because exactly like you said, you're not the same couple that you
Yeah.
were when you initially had kids. But
Yes.
somehow we expect to pick up where we left off. But I don't feel like that's a realistic or sustainable model. What we suggest is recreating your relationship. So at this new exciting stage where you're at now, where you have teenagers, getting curious and going and intentional and being, how can we recreate our relationship right now? And what is that going to look like? And that will change your values, your goals, your qualities, who you are, how you interact with each other. There's so much to that, but it gets to be exciting that you get to recreate your relationship. And that's actually the key, I believe, to keeping the spark alive. So that's the second question I get all the time. How do you keep the spark alive? Well, it's very intentional. It's not going to happen by itself, and it will require that you are recreating your relationship. And it's kind of like a recommitment. And after going through a really hard time and almost getting divorced ourselves 4 years ago, we now do this recreate framework minimum once a year, because we know that if we are growing individually, our relationship must be growing too. Otherwise, it's going in the opposite direction. And that's how we ended up, feeling like we were growing apart. But yeah, the key is, how can you get more intentional and actually see this as an opportunity for growth and to recreate your relationship and your connection?
Yes, I love that. And it does, like, it makes it feel exciting rather than
Yes.
like
Then
you
like,
don't feel sort of
oh,
like lost
work on my
lost in it.
relationship.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, we're really big on making it feel a bit more fun because we get that it can be confusing, it can be hard, it can, emotions can feel just like not tangible sometimes. And that's why people avoid them. But it can be fun. It can be fun. It can be exciting. It can be incredibly rewarding as well if come from this approach as it's the greatest opportunity for you to grow, not just individually or as a couple, but even spiritually. Like your relationship is really, I see it as a spiritual journey that you get to go on. So yeah, I think it's so exciting, and I think the world really needs to value relationships a bit more. And I think that's why we're all feeling, a lot of people are feeling disconnected.
Yeah, definitely. So when we talk about recreating our relationship and reconnecting with our partners, like how do you recommend we get started with that? With people listening going, yes, well, this all makes sense, but
Yes.
we're
How
so
do I make time
busy.
for this?
How do I
Yeah.
make time for this? Where do I get started? Like, what would you say to that?
Definitely. And I get this question a lot, and I love making it simple. And I get the feedback that we do make it simple. So, the very first step is where I would suggest to start is where we started. So, I felt all the things you were feeling, and I felt really overwhelmed and didn't know where to start. So, I actually started with a 5-minute coffee check in with my husband. I actually wrote an article about it. Because we'd gone up north, we did a trip up north with our kids. And I remember before we left thinking, this is going to be great, but we're spending 3 weeks together. And I can see that if we're not staying connected and communicating, this could end up turning into a trip that, with two young children, that we don't end up enjoying. So I remember saying to my husband before we left, I really would love to commit to our coffee check-ins every single morning at camp to help us make sure that we have the best possible holiday. And my husband was like, that is such a great idea. Let's do it. And I just recorded some reels of us doing it while we we're away and thought, oh, just that's easy social media. I'll just share it in case anyone gets any value. People loved it. I got so much feedback, and I realized, then I had questions of like, what do we actually talk about? How do we know what to say? So I thought, oh, I better put this in an article. So I put it in an article. It actually went viral, ended up in the New York Post, all over Australia. I actually couldn't believe it. I was
Wow.
at the skate park with my kids when it happened and just saw my phone blowing up, and I was like, oh my God, my kids didn't care. They were like, Mum, watch this trick. I was like, yep, this is great. Keeping me grounded and humble.
Gone
Yep.
viral.
They're like, I don't care. And that's what I love about motherhood, actually. I'm never going to get a big head because my kids don't care. They're like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah,
I
yeah,
care
yeah.
about is how you're showing up. But that's kind of where this coffee check-in was born from. And we actually started doing it 4 years ago because we were so disconnected. We were so lost. I felt like I couldn't reach my husband's heart. It felt like there was no time. Like the only things we were talking about were bills, kids, food shopping, who's cleaning the house, who's doing the most, who's not doing enough. Like we would in all those comparison traps and arguments. There was a lot of resentment between us. And I realized that all the ways I had been trying to work on this were not working. So I got really honest with myself and asked myself, what did I really want? I wanted connection and I wanted deeper conversation. So I asked myself, well, in my everyday life, where can I make time for this right now? Or where do I already have time for this that I can actually leverage it and make better use of that time instead of scrolling on my phone or whatever? And our morning coffee was the best time for me to do it. So I literally just started one day. I just decided I'm going to make our coffee and I'm going to go to my husband and say, I really would love to just have a check in with you this morning. I'd love to connect, have a chat, and really just listen to each other. And he was like, yeah, I'm all for that. Like, I miss you. That sounds great. Like, you're not going to bring a list to me of all these things I need to do. Let's do it. He was just so happy. So, we actually also sat outside. I really recommend trying to do it somewhere where you feel kind of relaxed as well, not in between kids. Our kids already had breakfast, so we could, go sit outside and have a coffee. But my intention was to connect with him. And I really stress that if you're going to do this, make sure your intention is pure and loving. A lot of people talk at their partner and wonder why it's not landing. And it's because you're lacking the intention. So, what is the intention of this conversation? And making sure it's a loving intention, not a fear based, convincing, trying to, secret agenda, all of that. We're all human. I know we all do that. But try and come from a loving intention. And my intention was just purely to connect with him. I missed him too. And I just came up with these questions that helped me to connect with him on a deeper level and say the things that weren't being said. And what was also really important, other than the intention, is to hold a safe space. And what I mean by that is there was no judgment. There was no fixing. I didn't interrupt him. We took turns answering these questions, and it really was about practicing active listening, which most of us don't do. Like 90% of the population feels misunderstood because we don't actively listen. We listen to respond or react. So the purpose was just to actively listen and to practice it daily. And the questions that we basically started with, and we actually still use these to today and share them with our clients. We started with, how are you feeling about yourself and our relationship right now? How are you feeling? And that question just really opened up a space for both of us to be honest about how we were feeling. We weren't being honest at that point. So it really gave us permission to be honest. We made sure that we kind of set a bit of a rule that with this connection, we have to take responsibility. So when I was sharing how I was feeling, I would put my hand on my heart and literally say, I am feeling this. Instead of saying, you make me feel this, you're doing that. So it's really important when you do this that you are taking responsibility for how you're feeling, and being vulnerable in that communication of how you're feeling. And then the other person, their job was just to listen. And we would kind of set a timer, because as you can see, I love to talk. So I would have would give each other about a minute to answer that question. How are you feeling about yourself? How are you feeling about the relationship? And just listen to each other. The next question we asked is, what are you loving about our relationship right now? What is working? What are you really happy with? What are you grateful for? So after we'd shared how we're feeling, it's really important to start with a win or to start with a celebration. Like with our children, it's like that positive reinforcement. There's a lot of science now that shows that positive reinforcement gets a better result than negative reinforcement, which is what a lot of us were raised with. So we really love to start with what is working. And it helps you when you ask that question and you're in a place of resentment, your brain then has to go and find an answer, which you can't see because you haven't been looking for it. Maybe you've been looking at all the problems.
Yeah.
So it helps you realize, oh, well, what is actually working is, I love how you're helping me with the kids with breakfast in the morning. I'm really appreciating that. It can be that simple. And what we found is when we started to acknowledge what was working, we found more of what was working. So it kind of helped us to feel better and to appreciate each other more. We were both feeling very unappreciated in the relationship. And just that question helped us to acknowledge each other more and appreciate what we were doing. Again, we just had a minute each to share what was working. And then the third question was, is there something on your mind that you haven't shared with me? So this really opened up a space for some of the things that might not be working, that they might be holding on to. Sometimes the worst part, the things that are causing the most damage in a relationship, are the unspoken things. So there's a lot that many of us have been people pleasers, or, we've been raised that way, and we don't communicate our needs. And that can actually create more destruction and erode the relationship more than sharing how you really feel. So this was a big one for us because my husband was really quite closed at that point. He was very much a people pleaser. He would please me on the surface and then wonder why I wasn't happy. And it was because he wasn't often telling me the truth. He would say yes, but mean no. And then I would feel guilty. So this question really gave him permission to tell me the truth. And I'd committed to hold a safe space and listen to anything that he was sharing. And what actually came out of this for me is I realized my husband was holding a lot that I wasn't aware of, that he had a whole heap of concerns. There was some, mental health things going on for him. And I hadn't created the space at all to listen or acknowledge them. And once I heard them and gave him the space, a lot of his behaviors on the surface then made total sense. And then I could have a bit more compassion and understanding for why things were feeling so hard. And I think for him as well, it helped him understand my mental load a lot better. Instead of me just telling him, I'm doing this, and like losing it at him and venting my day, I actually shared with him things that were on my mind that I was worried about that he had no idea. And we just again listened, shared openly, and we learned a lot about each other with that question. The fourth question is, what is important to you this week? So what's happening this week or today, depending on how you're doing this check-in, that you need support with? I was really guilty of not asking for help. I'm that strong woman, Miss Independent. I'd been trained to, if you can do something, you should do it yourself. So I had a really hard time asking for help and receiving help. So this question really made me be vulnerable with my husband and share where I needed support. It made it a lot easier for him to know where I needed help and how he could actually help me. And it also helped me to understand what support he needed. I was giving him support in ways that he didn't actually need support. And he hadn't asked me to do that. But I was just doing that because maybe that's what I needed. So it really helped us get really clear on what support we actually both needed and how we could do that for each other. And then the final part was literally just to reflect on what we'd shared and just check in with, is there any actions we need to take? Do we need to make some changes to our schedule? Do we need to get more support? Do we need to hire a cleaner or get a babysitter? Like those practical, tangible steps of maybe what's come up in what you've shared and maybe some solutions. And not every time did we have solutions at the end of the check-in, but it didn't really matter. Just the fact of being heard and seen and validated, which is what every human being needs, helped us to feel better about the problem. And when you feel better about the problem, it's a lot easier to solve it. So sometimes it would take a coffee check-in that we'd have at the start of the week, and by the end of the week, we would have solved the problem. But that was still a lot faster than what it was taking us before we did this. We were getting trapped in problems for months because we just didn't know how to address them. So we basically just continued to go through that process. We still do today. We love it. It became easier and easier. And like I say to couples, it compounds. So it's that daily check-in compounds. So it's not really just one check-in. That check-in builds, and that builds your connection. It strengthens your connection. So when a challenge does come up, because it will, because life is challenging, you know that you can actually connect with your partner and you can have a conversation and you can solve it together. So it really, to me, it solved a really big problem that a lot of couples have, which is finding the time to communicate and connect amongst kids and doing it in a way that it actually gets to feel good.
Yeah. And I mean, my feeling is if couples just did this even once a week, there
Even
could
once a week.
be an
Yes.
amazing change
Yes,
in
100%.
relationships.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
And
you will love it so much, you will want to do it more. That's what's happened for us, but exactly. Some couples weekly that's a stretch for them. So if that feels like a stretch for you, start weekly. Make it easy for you to succeed. I always say that to couples. Make it easy for you to succeed at this. So if it needs to be a week, start with once a week. And notice how much better you feel. I actually have if you have been trying to scribble down those questions and you want them, I'll give you the link so that they can get their own copy. You can download your own copy and you can make it your own. I've had couples that have they don't drink coffee, it works with tea, or they do an evening walk.
Oh,
because,
yes, an
yeah,
evening
so
walk. That's
you
a
could
great
do it as
idea.
an evening walk. And instead of talking about the trees or the sky or your work day, which a lot of people fall into,
Mm.
and then they feel like they're never connecting as a couple, use these questions to connect on your walk. That's another great way you can do
Yes,
it.
and they're just such simple questions, but it's amazing how we can go through life. I mean, my husband and I, we both work from home, we both run our business, so we're around each other all the time, but sometimes weeks can go by and you're like, we haven't actually even had like a deep or a decent conversation, if we're not intentional about it. So
Yeah,
this is
definitely.
definite, so I found out about you through reading this article that kind of went around. I think I saw it on Instagram. And that's when I got in touch with you. I just love this idea so much. But I will say I'm guilty that I haven't implemented it yet. But this is very timely for me because we're about to go on an overseas trip with our two teenagers. And already, I mean, I'm so excited about it, but I know that it's going to be tricky, the dynamic with the four of us together 24/7, like for a whole month. So I think this will be so helpful for us to, and you've kind of got that extra space and time when you're on holiday as well to start to implement something like this. So
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Please do it. And please let me know how you go. And I think it will help. It saved our holiday, like literally,
Mm.
because there's so many moving pieces when you're on holiday. And you think it's going to be easier. But
Yes.
there's so many other things, because you fill that time with other things. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it will really help. And I'd love to hear how you go as well.
Yeah, and I just love how simple it is. And yeah, like how, like the other tip that I loved about what you said is going into it with an intention of connecting rather than, right, I'm going to tell him all the things that I'm not happy with, or, so I think that that is super important as well. Yeah. And so I also wanted to ask you, our audience are primarily mums. We do have some dads that listen as well, but what we hear from a lot of our community is that mums feel like they're holding a lot of the mental load, doing a lot of the parenting, maybe feeling like they're doing an unfair amount of the parenting, the household chores, they're working out of home, they're holding the mental load. What would you say to those mums in terms of, focusing on, like, I guess, bringing spark back to their relationship when they're in a situation like that?
Yeah, well, that was me. That was one of the first articles I wrote was realizing that I get to choose me in my relationship. It was an article I wrote for Mamma Mia about, I had a realization one day where I was doing everything. Like you said, we'd finished dinner. I'd cooked the dinner. I was washing the dishes and my husband was running outside playing with my two children. And I had this moment of like pride and joy. Look at my beautiful family as I'm looking out at them. And then this second wave of like frustration, anger, resentment just washed over me. And I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And I just got a bit curious about it. And I was like, what is this feeling? And it was frustrating. I felt like I was on the sidelines in my life. I felt like I was watching all these things that I was creating, but I wasn't actually in them. And I really resented my husband a bit for that mental load that I felt was all on my shoulders. So I totally understand how women feel this, and that was me as well. Um, the first step for me was having that realization, that seeing it for what it was, that I was actually on the outside of my life. And also asking myself, what expectations was I putting on my shoulders? Because the reason I was in that place was actually because of the expectations I was putting on my shoulders. The mum I decided I wanted to be, the way I wanted my home to look, the way I wanted my children to eat and be dressed. And, I had all these beliefs and rules and expectations of myself, of what I thought a good mum, a good wife, etc., would be. And it was actually a hard pill to swallow, that I had to acknowledge I had put those expectations on myself. Never once has my husband come to me and said, I expect dinner on the table by this time. I expect the kids to have brand new clothes when they need them. He has never done that. It was actually an expectation that I think had been passed down to me generationally. And I had to really acknowledge that and then ask myself, if that was really the mum that I wanted to be. If in this season, which is really hard but short, they grow up so fast. How did I actually want to show up? How did I want to feel? Um, and the answer was I didn't want to feel what I currently was. I felt resentful, frustrated. I felt like I was the grumpy mum. I was the naggy mum. Everything was being done on the surface, but I didn't feel very like I was enjoying the moment or being present. And yes, there was lots to do, but I was also making that more important than me. So I had to really acknowledge that the only person who can choose me is me. And that my happiness is my responsibility. And I'm also not responsible for my husband's happiness or my children's. I had this unrealistic story going that, I'll rest when everything's done. I mean, that is just the most like impossible story as a mum because you have to wash every day, like you have to eat every day. Nothing is ever done. So I basically never rested until I was exhausted. And I actually did start to lose my hair. I started to get quite sick. I wasn't sleeping. And that's really what made me go, this is not working. This isn't working. I need to rest so that I have the energy to get everything done. I need to put myself first so that I can actually be the mum that I want to be. And I just started to reframe it just one by one. And that meant that sometimes my house was messier than it used to be. It meant that sometimes things weren't done perfectly, but I chose to break up with that perfection and chose myself instead. It was a hard decision to make because I had kind of built my life on being a bit of a perfectionist. But once I became a mum, that just basically had to go out of the window. If I really wanted to be a present mum, I had to let go of perfectionism. And I'd say that's the place to start with your beliefs about the type of mum you think you need to be, or maybe the type of mum the world or your own mum has told you. Often it's not even our voice or our belief. It's something that's been handed down to us. And just asking yourself, is it really true or is it helpful or is it getting you what you want? And when I asked myself those tough questions, I got answers that were very clear that no, it was not. And it actually became easier for my husband to help me when I broke up with this story around the perfectionism. And, I even used to tell myself it's just easier if I do everything. He doesn't do it right. There was just so many layers to this story that meant even if he was helping me, I couldn't actually receive it because he didn't do it in the right way or whatever it was, and it was silly things like how he was cutting the kids' sandwiches or, you know what I mean? Like, but your beliefs control your behaviors. So I logically knew that it didn't matter, but I couldn't actually change that until I changed my belief. And I was okay with things being done imperfectly, or things being done a different way. So I would say there's a deeper meaning to this mental load. It is there, definitely. I'm not denying there is not a mental load. 100% there is a mental load. But I do think that the missing part of this conversation is what women are defining as a mother or as a woman. And I think we get to take our power back and actually, like I did, recreate that meaning, redefine what it means to be a mother. I used to not allow friends to come over until my house was spotless. They didn't say that. They didn't say, hey, we're coming over, clean your house. But I was doing that to me, and I realized when friends did come over with their kids, they didn't really feel that welcome because I was like, put your shoes here and do this. And I, totally understand, like you want a clean house and all those things, but I had to let go of that in order to have what I really wanted, which was more connection. And I think on a deeper level, every woman I speak to wants more connection. They want more connection with themselves, with their partner, with their children. It's that deeper sense of fulfillment. So if we can, look at our concept of ourself, our identity, our belief of motherhood, and empower ourselves to change it, because we are in a different world. Like my mum stayed at home and my dad worked, but that is not the reality now. I can't keep trying to live that because that just is not the reality of 2024. So I just had to decide, okay, if it's a different reality, then it also needs to be different expectations. So let's readdress those. Let's get clear about, for me and my husband, we really do share the load. I don't feel like I'm carrying the mental load. But that's been a conscious unlearning and a conscious choosing of, we're in this together. And I remember actually saying to my husband when I went through this awakening, if anything happened to me right now, you wouldn't know what to do with the kids. And that's not actually your fault. I'm not letting you. I'm not letting you learn. The only reason I know what to do is I'm the one doing it. I've had more practice. So I just had to allow him to take more of the responsibility. He was very willing, but I actually wasn't allowing him to. And I do see this with a lot of women. A lot of men are very willing. They won't do it your way. They will do it a different way. And that's actually okay. Our kids do need different parents. They really do. They don't need you to be the same. You don't even have to, I don't believe you have to have the exact same way of parenting. You can have the same values, definitely core values or intentions, but you're going to have different ways of expressing that. And that's okay. They need like the masculine and the feminine approach. Both are valid, both are helpful. And I really feel that they want to work together. The masculine and feminine want to support each other in life. And I think we need more couples rising together in that way to show our kids we don't have to be at war. We don't need to fight against each other. We actually are designed to work together. But that's going to mean accepting some of our differences and learning how to work within them, instead of trying to make each other the same, because we're just not. We're not biologically the same, so we're just not going to be the same. And that's okay. Difference is actually amazing. We just need to learn how to appreciate it, accept it, and work within it. And part of that with the mental load is being willing to receive help and let that help maybe look different to how you think it needs to look.
Yeah, and such an interesting reframe. And I think even what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, I think the more connection we have with our partner, the easier it is to kind of come up with an agreement in terms of how that load of house chores and parenting and all the mental load stuff is kind of who's responsible for what and that sort of thing. When you're holding a lot of resentment, there's no connection there, like it's impossible to
And
both be happy with that, isn't it?
exactly. And what I have to remind couples all the time is you're in this together.
Yeah.
You're on the same team. Like, let's remember that. We're on the same team. We're in this together. There is no I in team. And if there's, an issue in a team, what do? They come together. They create a new plan. To tackle the game. Like, they try a different approach. And life is really just one big game that we need to keep figuring out and working out. But if we're not willing to have those conversations, if we're not willing to connect with each other and come from a place of we're in this together, how can we work this out together? I think where this goes wrong is you're not doing this, I'm doing everything. Where are you? Like, when we come from that approach, I mean, you wouldn't come to a team member with that approach at your workplace or on a in sport, because you wouldn't get the result that you want. So it must come from a place of the common goal that we are in this together, we're on the same team, and what does it need to look like so that we both feel like we're supported, like we both feel our needs are being met. And that's going to be different to what you saw your parents do. And that's just because we're in a total different time, and it's requiring different things, and that's okay. But we need to get resourceful and creative about how to solve these problems. And if we're in the problem and we're like blaming each other, we're basically taking away our power and we cannot see a solution. So first connect, remember that you're in it together, that you do love each other, and open to recreating what this needs to look like so that you can create a win-win. And you absolutely can, but you do need to get to a place where you're open to their input. You're open to their perspective. You let them influence you. If you want them to listen to them, you need to listen to you. You need to listen to them. You've got to be the example of what you want, be the change you want to see, and then you can create it. That's really
Yes.
how you do it.
Yes, I love it. Well, I could speak to you for hours and pick your brain for hours, but yeah, we'll finish up. But I'd love for you to tell our listeners what you offer and where people can find out more about you. And we'll make sure all of your links are in the show notes so people can find you easily.
Yes, definitely. So I will give you the coffee check-in link because I really would love for you guys to try it and let me know. Feel free to tag me and let me know. I love seeing in my stories we're doing our coffee check-in. I love celebrating you. So feel free to share that, and I will share the link for that. My website is www.astonsimmonds.com, so you can see me there. We do have a 4-week program which covers what we've talked about today. It's ironically called Recreate Your Relationship. So we've broken it down into 4 steps: communication, connection, intimacy, and that relationship vision that I've just been talking about. So if you think, oh my gosh, I want to recreate my relationship, but how do I actually do it? The 4-week program, Recreate Your Relationship, will step you through it. It's designed for parents, so it only requires 1 hour a week. And I am not joking. The amount of messages I get, I've only done week 2 and we've already turned around, is amazing. We really have taken out the fluff and just put in the really simple steps we had to take, a bit like the coffee check-in, to help us get the result that we wanted. So it's a fast, quick, easy program, doesn't require a lot of time or effort. It's all online, it's all self-paced. So perfect for mums, busy mums and parents. That's who we designed it for. So I'll send you the link and you can basically click the link. It's still 50% off at the moment. So it's at a really great deal. And yeah, it can help you basically apply what we've been talking about.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an amazing chat. I'm sure our listeners are going to get so much out of it.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week. Before you go, don't forget about my free online on-demand masterclass, 3 simple ways to naturally boost your kids' immunity to avoid a winter full of sickness. I'm sharing my practical tips on ways that you can strengthen your whole family's immune system to avoid the onslaught of winter infections so your family can stay healthy and well this winter. You can sign up at naturalsuperkids.com/immune.